if you are watching on one of the streaming channels, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. If you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, thank you for hitting play. I always appreciate everybody taking time to listen to the conversations that we have here on To Be Blunt. And today's is going to be a delightful one. Obviously, all my guests I bring on because there's something that we can all learn from them. But specifically, I'm a little more excited for Asa to be on the podcast because we've actually been panelists together at some Lucky Leaf Expos. I get your emails. I'm subscribed to your Warning Letter Wednesday newsletters, which I want to dive into. And really, I just think what you speak on, what your background is, what you're kind of bringing to the industry is so important for brands, businesses, operators, people who are curious, marketers especially, to be mindful of, to pay attention to. And so, welcome to the show. I'm happy to have you.
All right. Hey, Shayda, thanks so much for having me today. And I really am a fan of this podcast. So I know we've known each other for a while now. As you mentioned, we've been fellow panelists at events in the past. So yeah, I'm really just pumped to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive in. What is your background? What is kind of your breadth of experience? I know you speak a lot on obviously like the regulation and compliance from a marketing label perspective. You do work supporting both regulated marijuana brands as well as hemp and CBD brands. So I, again, know who you are, but for the listeners, for the people watching, tuning in, give us, the breadth of where you come from and how you ended up operating in the cannabis space.
I love it. Thank you for that. So my story begins with me. I had a lot more hair on my head in the late 90s, maybe a big beard, and I followed my passion for clinical herbalism to Boulder, Colorado. So I'll make this brief, but the story begins with me being a passionate herbalist. So I came to Boulder, I studied clinical herbalism, I studied at a 3-year program, and then I started making dietary supplements in 2001. So I really grew up in the dietary supplement industry. I learned the ins and outs of all these regulations that say came out, such as GMPs for dietary supplements, adverse event reporting, things like that. And around 2015 or so, I was helping run a contract manufacturing company that started using hemp extract. Hey, this is wonderful. So saw a lot of therapeutic benefits with a lot of our contract manufacturing clientele. And shortly after that, I got recruited to help run a large liposomal company called Quicksilver Scientific. They make some great increased bioavailability products. High absorption was worked with brands like Wana, on the regulated side to help them with some of their technologies. And at that point, I got recruited to run or chair the American Herbal Products Association's Cannabis Committee. So for those of you who may not know, AHPA, AHPA, is a top trade group for the dietary supplement and cannabis industry. So kind of starting at the beginning, following my passion for herbalism, dietary supplement manufacturing, and then coming into hemp cannabinoids and cannabis. So as chair of the Cannabis Committee, with APA, which I still have the great honor of being chairperson of, we really work with the federal legislators on helping to shape the future of regulatory compliance for mostly the hemp cannabinoid space. So that I've been doing for about 3.5 years. And a couple of years ago, Shayda, I started a company called Supplement Advisory Group, and we really focus on finding online marketing risk, and then we help our clients come up with lower risk ways to talk about this. So this is in the regulated cannabis space somewhat, in the hemp cannabinoid space, and then in the dietary supplement space as well. And part of that is we also help companies register their hemp CBD products in states like West Virginia and Utah, which is pretty nuanced and somewhat annoying, but it's something we love doing.
Thank you for that introduction. I feel like when I talk to you, I always learn something new. So I'm really excited for the listeners because you're just a wealth of information and you always speak so knowledgeably, but so openly, which is very appreciated, obviously, on the To Be Blunt show. I really value when people can speak transparently because I think that so much of our industry is shrouded in just misinformation and misunderstandings, really. And so I think, to kind of tee it off, and I definitely have some other kind of, personal stories and things that I want to like feed into the conversation because what you represent and the conversation that you have become an expert in helping navigate is so important. And I think a lot of people don't really realize the gravity or the degree to the implications. I mean, you just mentioned like marketing, labeling, obviously dietary and supplement, the warning letters coming from the FDA. So to kind of start at the top, why do people need to be mindful of what their website, their labels, their social media is saying in regards to making claims about cannabis?
Got it. Good question. I love you're right. I love talking about this stuff. We could talk about this all day. So the main reason why companies really need to be careful is because of what's called a warning letter. FDA warning letters. I know a lot of the audience here knows what this is, but just really quick, if the FDA sees a company or finds a company not doing something right, they'll issue a warning letter. That's a notice of violation that they're doing something wrong. Now, warning letters, really briefly, we want to avoid them because they require legal resources to respond to. They're super embarrassing. Dear person in the company name can be memorialized forever in warning letter history, and they rank really high on SEO. They also can lead to injunction. They scare away brand partners. And they also, in this day and age in the cannabis space, there's so much M&A, mergers and acquisitions, strategic alliance happening, and getting a warning letter is really the quickest way to scare away the strategic investment. And last but not least, it oftentimes leads to class action lawsuits. Companies will get warning letters, and then it can lead to class action lawsuits. Plaintiff attorneys basically use this as a rationale of wrongdoing in their plaintiff attorney lawsuit. So really the main reason why we want to have our marketing compliant is to avoid warning letters. But then there's also the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. They also send out warning letters, but every once in a while they send out an administrative complaint. This is like a warning letter with a lot of teeth. So we saw some administrative complaints come out to companies like Cushley Industries, and I'm not denigrating anyone. This is all just public information. Administrative complaints can come with serious fines, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000. Companies are then required to return customer payments. So basically all the money they got with what the FTC considers deceptive marketing practices, they need to return to people. Those are between the FDA and FTC, those are two big reasons why we want to stay compliant.
No, super helpful to kind of frame it up. Now let's kind of open the scope a little bit, and I want to kind of understand a little bit more. Again, I understand, and maybe most people in the industry understand, you don't want a warning letter, right? Like that is bad for all the things that you just highlighted. But why is the FDA and the FTC even involved, right? Like why do we as operators need to even be fearful or mindful or cautious over what we say? Why do these organizations have a say in our business? I just want to hear from your perspective and to kind of level set it, why we even need to pay attention to what these organizations are saying or why they care.
Yes, indeed. So the FDA handles or oversees manufacturing and labeling of things that we ingest. They're the Food and Drug Administration. So they handle lots of things, more than what we ingest. But for the purpose of this conversation, we'll think about things that we ingest or we put on our body. So they oversee how companies are making it and then labeling it. But in this day and age, especially in digital marketing, everything's an extension of label. So the FDA's purview starts when companies make a product all the way to they label it, but then that extends to how they're marketing it. Because again, all marketing is an extension of the label. The FTC, really the Federal Trade Commission, they just oversee advertising practices. Are you making a claim which can be backed by science? So I like to use this example when I differentiate the FDA and FTC. Let's say that there's great randomly controlled clinical trials on a cannabis product for COVID. How about this example? Well, as long as this is backed by sound science called competent and reliable scientific evidence, CARS, then the FTC would say, oh, you've got the information to back up this claim. Well, the FDA would say, I don't care if you've got all the science in the world. you're crossing over from a disease, from a dietary supplement claim or a cosmetic claim into a disease claim category. So even if we have all the data to back it up, the FDA doesn't allow us to make this statement.
Okay, super helpful to outline because yes, I think like I'll speak for, the audience, right? I think we understand the FDA or the FTC's role, but how it interacts with hemp, CBD, cannabinoids, regulated cannabis, it's obviously very murky. It's like, I know I can't make a claim saying, oh, my product is going to cure cancer, for example. Or I think a big one that we saw a lot during COVID was CBD with CBG is going to help, ward off COVID symptoms. And so it's like, I think most people hopefully listening know that those are like big things that you cannot say, and obviously the implications then are you're going to potentially get on the radar of the FDA or the FTC. And I think another observation that I've made, and I'd be curious, kind of a two-part question. One, when I've seen some of these warning letters, it's not just like a big brand name. It's like, I think people's assumption is like, oh, I'm so small, nobody's gonna get me. And then I've also seen some where they are smaller brands. I've even seen an Austin company get flagged, and I'm based here in Austin, as you and the listeners know. So I think when I started seeing that kind of unravel, it definitely, made the hair on the back of my neck perk up a little bit, because it's like, oh, there's no rhyme or reason for how these organizations are enforcing, is probably the best word I'll use. And I was talking to somebody else, and they were talking about, thinking of how Google has like Google alerts for if I want to look at my business name, or have a Google alert for myself. Like the FDA and the FTC similarly have much more intricate solutions to be scouring the internet. And obviously we do the hard work by putting our content up there on Instagram, Facebook, Google, YouTube, insert whatever. We're using hashtags, we're writing captions. It's just ripe for these agencies to be crawling. And so I'm curious, kind of, is that observation correct, that it's kind of fair game for everybody? And then kind of the secondary part to that is on these warning letters, again, we know we can't make overzealous like medical claims, but I mean, some of these warning letters have come for things that I think people just wouldn't really realize are breaking. I don't know if it's breaking the law, right? It's just they're speaking out of term, and that, I guess, is breaking the law. So I'm curious who these warning letters really are going to. Who do the FTC and FDA really look for? And then on the brand side, what is kind of I know it's like a big question, but like, what is the breadth of things that are maybe not traditional, like medical claims, that they're also looking for, that brands and operators need to be conscious and considerate about?
Yes, I love that. So it's a complex question, but there's a lot of great information here. So let's review this. So first off, if a company is marketing their products online, that includes social media, they are on the FDA's radar. To your point, very small companies get warning letters. In fact, as you mentioned on the onset, I write a weekly post called Warning Letter Wednesday. I stayed up very late last night writing Warning Letter Wednesday. There was a company, a dietary supplement company that was from the East Coast, kind of a groovy herbalist-owned farmer type company that then made a cough syrup. Well, this company is the epitome of small. Tiny, really small company. Well, they received a warning letter for making implied COVID claims about their product. Now, they weren't coming out and saying that our product treats COVID, but they were using COVID hashtags in a social media post. So context matters. So if you're marketing products online, you're on the FDA's radar. I haven't verified this, but the FDA and FTC, they likely use a keyword search algorithm. They might type in cannabis, hemp, CBD, cancer, Alzheimer's. I'm just picking high-risk words. And then if they find that on a website, they will likely keep digging deeper and deeper. So really this number one best thing that companies can do to mitigate risk is remove high-risk buzzwords. And so looking at enforcement and kind of why some companies get into trouble, the FDA and FTC, they really look at the 10,000-foot view of a company's online persona. So one claim, let's say hashtag anxiety, probably not going to get a warning letter, but when that same hashtag is combined with maybe a claim made in a blog, a claim made in a video, an ingredient description, something like that, a TikTok video, the authorities, they really piece them all together for one big picture of non-compliance. And they like to make examples out of companies, Shayda, in areas that they're not in areas that they want to focus on. So for example, lately they've been focusing on social media, anxiety and depression together, claims made in blogs. So that's one of the great things about following enforcement trends, which is why by saying, oh yeah, the FDA has been focusing on CBD and animal related claims a lot, I should really make sure that all my CBD and animal related statements are very clean. So kind of following enforcement trends and then adapting accordingly. And then on the context question, really, I think a lot of these companies, they may not know that they're crossing the line. So I know a lot of the listeners out there are saying, of course, companies shouldn't be making claims about depression and COVID with their cannabis products or their hemp cannabinoid product. And I agree, but I bet that a lot of these companies don't know that they're inadvertently crossing the line. So the hashtag is a great example. And here's a really interesting data point, because I'm a data geek. So CBD related warning letters are actually up 350% this year over all of last year. And we're only in October. And this is FDA warning letters. So of these warning letters, this year, 33% mention claims related to animals. That's a lot. 45% mention claims in blogs. So this really shows that the FDA is paying close attention to claims made on these platforms or about these type of products. But so back to my point is that companies may not know that by talking about cannabis and a study of Alzheimer's in their blog on their commercial website where they're selling a product, that's considered an implied claim. I'm using the hashtag example a lot, but that's top of mind for the FDA. Companies may not realize that by putting a YouTube video, linking a YouTube channel to their commercial website, they're responsible for all the claims in the YouTube video. So this kind of demonstrates how companies are they want to do things right, but they may not just know the rules about how these disease claims could inadvertently slip by. And it happens all the time, especially in blogs.
Yeah, it's so hard to keep track of. I mean, two kind of follow-up points come to mind. One, I want to kind of, ask point blank. I heard even testimonials. So you're talking about obviously like a blog. Yes, that's on my website. I'm writing the content, obviously my label, my social media, the context using hashtags. But I was recently discovering testimonials. So even when a customer makes a anecdotal but personal, testimony saying this product, and it could even be as harmless as, I got better sleep tonight versus this actually, cured my insomnia, it would be treated the same. And so I heard that testimonials even we can't obviously use on our website because we're liable for what the consumer is saying in that testimonial. Is that accurate from your observation?
Yes, and let's break down testimonials a little bit. If a company website is using true third-party user-generated, non-compensated, non-curated content, it's coming through on a platform such as Trustpilot. Now, the authorities, they've been pretty hands-off with that. I haven't seen really any enforcement, unless, this is the big unless or the big but, is if a company then engages with them. So let's say these product reviews are coming through, these testimonials are coming through, and then someone writes, hey, I tried ASA's CBD product and it worked great for my insomnia. If I, as the company, then commented on that on my website, that's considered endorsing it. There was actually a CBD related warning letter a couple months ago on this. I was really excited when I saw it because I'm like, yes, it proves the point that their authorities have been hands off unless you engage with it. So they're engaging, hey, thanks so much for that comment. That's considered substantiation of it. Now, if a company then took that same testimonial or that product review, I use these words often interchangeably, and then copied it onto socials, used it to showcase on their product page, the more light they shine on it, the more attention they pay to it, the more likely it is to be considered a marketing claim. So third-party generated content, authorities have been pretty hands-off up to now. But then the more attention I pay to that, I'm using that on a carousel on my homepage, something like that. That's considered a marketing claim.
My brain is exploding because I think, when you and I, just from being connected and speaking publicly together and then having our preliminary conversation, like I said, I'm always learning something new. But I also like to pride myself on being close to the pulse on what's going on in the industry. But, without falling on the sword, I think it's very difficult for us to maintain 100% compliance in this regard. Not that I don't want to be compliant. It's just one very difficult, I think, for brands to understand the degree of, connection or separation, right? It's like, okay, maybe I know, again, I shouldn't say this will cure cancer, but how am I supposed to know if a customer says that and then I engage with that, or maybe I use it in social media, that is going to potentially be a course for action? And then the second thing that comes to mind, which is kind of how you and I re-engaged to get set up for the podcast, we were going through payment merchant processors. We are, as a CBD brand, looking for a new provider because the industry is very tumultuous. And, current provider says I can sell my products, but I can't sell paraphernalia, or I can do my products, but I can't do subscriptions. And you're like, the hell? That doesn't make any sense. Like, if you let me sell, the flower, why can't I sell the device to smoke the flower? And so anyways, we were finding a new processor because that was a pain point that we were experiencing, just generally navigating the industry, trying to find, providers who are going to support what we want to operate and sell in the industry. And this new payment processor was like, hey, you can't say your personal testimony on your About Me page. And it was something to the effect of, when RX failed me, I pursued cannabis, which is the truth for me. I was in my car accident. I was prescribed opioids, steroid injections, and I made a personal choice to get off opioids and steroid injections and to put myself on cannabis. But even the act of me kind of tangentially telling that story became a flag for this processor. And then it became a snowball effect where they were like, oh, you also can't say this word, you can't say that word, but they weren't even medical words. Like, I think one of the more shocking words that came to mind was I couldn't say the word psychotropic or psychoactive, and this is in regards to psychoactive products like Delta 8, Delta 9 THC. And so for me as a marketer, as a business owner, as someone who's also steeped in this industry, I'm like, one, obviously I want my customers to know what they're buying. I don't want a customer to not be prepared for a psychotropic experience or effect. Two, is that a medical word, right? Like, I understand it's an effect, but is that a medical word? I'm not making a medical claim. I thought that I was being very factual. And so anyways, it just became a thing where there's no rule book for, these are words that you can say, or these are things you can't say. And that's where I think it's really hard to kind of loop it back around for operators. Yes, you exist. People should contact you. They should do business with you. You're keeping your ear to the pulse of this. But how do regular people know, oh, this word is going to piss off the FDA? And so kind of how do they expect us to abide by rules that we don't even know are rules to play the game, right?
Yeah, that's you bring up some really interesting points here, Shayda. So when we're looking at the regulating bodies, FDA, FTC, I oftentimes just look to dietary supplement regs. We have years and years of case law and things that we can refer back to. But in lieu of clear FDA guidance on hemp cannabinoids in particular, we have credit card processors kind of coming up with their own rules. So in this gray area where we're waiting for clear federal guidance, we have states coming up with their own regs. We have credit card processors coming up with their own regs. That, you're right, it doesn't make any sense why the word psychotropic or your About Me page, which wouldn't say, and that's why this is better than drugs. I mean, it sounds, based on what you described, it sounds very low risk. I would never think any of these would attract a warning letter, but the fact that it attracted attention from a credit card or a processor really is too bad, to put it mildly. So how do we stay up on this? Well, I mentioned Warning Letter Wednesday, a post that I write each week. It's a labor of regulatory love, just like your podcast, right? We do these programs because we love it and we love educating. So Warning Letter Wednesday is a great one. I also have a YouTube video channel. ACE's regulatory education series, where I just review interesting regulatory hints. There's not a great resource for here's what you can say, here's what you can't say, other than trying to stay away from disease claims. So I made a video on my YouTube. It's 1 minute, and it rolls out some helpful hints, such as words ending in itis. Itis means inflammation of. Anything a drug is indicated for, such as Xanax is indicated for anxiety. Anxiety would be the claim. Just kind of coming up with these parameters for marketing, I think, is a good starting point. But yeah, to what you said, there's no great all-encompassing rule that says you can say this or you can't say this, and then it's further complicated by credit card processors or states coming up with their own twist on what they think the regulations are.
Yeah, it's very overwhelming and daunting. And again, kind of going back to some of the earlier points you were making, right? I think a lot of people think, oh, this isn't going to be flagged by my business. Like, oh, I'm just, a small operator. I didn't intend to say those things. Maybe, like you said earlier, they say it once. Maybe the regulation bodies look the other way, but the more you say it, the more that they can see that you're kind of, driving content around it. It's like, actually, you're kind of intentionally doing this, but it is so scary knowing that, at any moment the FDA could or the FTC could give you a warning letter. You were mentioning some stats earlier as well about, kind of the percentage of how many warning letters have gone out. I think I see fractions of it, again, trying to keep up, but I want to understand a little bit from your perspective, like, how many warning, like, is there a rhyme or reason to the warning letters? Is there, like you were saying, that there's more this year than last year? Is there a cap on it? Like, do they come out every week? Like, do people need to be like, oh, I'm not in it this week, great, I live another day, and then it's like, okay, next week, is the letter going to come to me or not? Like, or is it very sporadic? And I think that probably makes it more scary, where it's like you just don't know when something is going to flag and if you'll be the recipient of it, right?
Yeah, I love that. So after the Oregon State COVID study came out in January, whenever it was earlier this year, I said publicly and to myself and to my wife and daughter, there's going to be a lot of warning letters that come out with this, because it had to do with cannabinoids and blocking COVID going into the cell, and it was a pretty decent introductory study. So that was no surprise that there were going to be a lot of companies using this, profiteering off this research for their own products. So that was kind of expected. Companies make claims about COVID and cannabis. It's the FDA and FTC. They're always going to be screening for this. Now, if a company then, so there is rhyme or reason when it comes to high-risk things that are always top of mind for the FDA. So we're going to think about COVID, Alzheimer's, anxiety and depression claims. These are always kind of top of mind. But to answer one of your questions or one of your comments, the warning letters just come out sporadically. They come out through the week. Most of them are posted on Tuesday afternoon, but they can come out at any time. So companies should really take a preventative approach, of course, right? Scan their old social media posts, scan their blogs to make sure that these high risk words aren't lurking in anywhere, because the FDA could be thinking about something else. So I mentioned CBD and animal claims. The FDA could be looking at a company's website now and saying, "Oh, you're selling CBD for animals." I'm really going to look deep at that now. There's kind of these sub-enforcement trends that are kind of beyond the keywords that they always look for. Again, COVID, depression, things like that.
On the subject of, research and studies, kind of a two-part question. One, I've started noticing that there are, for example, like a study that might be done that says CBD or insert whatever cannabinoid could be good for XYZ. These are preliminary trials. Do I have any protection because there is a study that's done from a medical, perspective that's like on, a .gov website, to be able to say anything because a study exists? And then the second part of that is, if I say something and I link to that study, does that give me any more security, or does that make me more liable because I'm now linking to a potential study that says, oh, this is actually good for insomnia or sleep or anxiety or COVID, right? And so they think that's just like such a hard place to be in, where it's like you want more research. Now more research is being done, but I can't even talk about the research without feeling like I'm going to be attacked or targeted.
Yes, I love this conversation. So it really brings up the point of education versus commerce. So if there is a purely educational website, YouTube channel, it's not linking back to where customers can take orders for products. That's kind of verbiage from FDA warning letters. So again, if we're being truly purely educational and we're not using it even implied to sell any products, then the authorities are pretty much largely hands off, right? Education. Now, let's say that we have a commercial website, and this has shown up, I think, in 8 FDA CBD related warning letters this year, where there's been a commercial site, the company's selling CBD products, but then on their science section or their education section, they may talk about CBD and COVID studies. Just having that study and that citation, even the URL or the study name on that commercial website where CBD is an ingredient, it's a component in a product sold on that website, that's enough to be an implied claim. Now, the FDA, in my opinion, they're probably not going to go after a company if it's relatively low risk, maybe not even anxiety, but because this was, in these examples, it's higher risk, it's COVID, even talking about ingredient research on that website where you're selling that CBD product was enough to attract the warning letter. So that's one part. The second part is linking to a study. It's not a bad strategy as long as your companies are careful about what commentary they add. If it's just a simple to link to a study and there's not a high risk disease word in the URL, you shorten it using bit URL or something like that. That's not a bad idea. But if you were saying, hey, check out these studies on CBD and Alzheimer's, if that commentary was added, then linking to that off-site study doesn't really provide any protection, because really the way the authorities look at things is, would a reasonable consumer think that you are providing this information for selling the product? And if so, you kind of want to tone it down. So a lot of companies may take the strategy of simply just linking to studies with no commentary on them, or here's some research that you might be interested in. That's not a strategy that's without risk, but it certainly seems like it mitigates it a little bit.
That's helpful to understand, again, in this web that is being spun of, okay, I can say this, I can't say that, I can do this here, but I got to be cautious if I do it there. It's just, it's obviously a lot to take in. And so I'm grateful for this conversation and just for you existing and being so passionate about it, because we need people who can try to help make sense of the madness, right? And so I want to turn a little bit to, I'm curious if you have any knowledge or understanding. Like, I think when we think of the FDA or the FTC, it's this big government body. But then when you look at cannabis regulation kind of on a state to state basis, you're realizing, I just had Kim Stuck from LA Consulting. She former, Colorado regulator, and she was speaking about most states have a very small team of people actually regulating in this side of the industry. So knowing the FDA oversees so many other industries and so many other products and issues and concerns, like, is there a number? Do we know there's 3 people who oversee the FDA's, hemp and CBD and cannabinoids program? Or maybe there isn't a dedicated program and it's, kind of more nebulous. I'm curious on their side, how many people are realistically in charge of the program? And then on the brand side, like from an enforcement perspective, I mean, you highlighted what some of the implications were should they get a warning letter, but I'm curious, like, is it detrimental? Do you notice that the brands who get warning letters, they go out of existence? Like, is it really hard to come back from it? Obviously, if you have to pay out claims and refund people, that could eat up your finances if you made a lot of claims and it's a lot of money that you have to pay out. But some of these warning letters, I don't see them necessarily, maybe it's more on the FTC versus the FDA side, but you're speaking about some of these animal products. I most recently was kind of reading some of those, and it was people who were saying yes, it's a product that you could give to your animal. And I think the issue that I observed was because it's not approved for animal consumption, that's why they got the warning letter, right? It's obviously not them selling the products, but it's that they said it was safe for animal consumption, and that is a whole other industry that needs to be dealt with, et cetera. So I'm just curious, how many regulators and who's actually regulating in these bodies, if we have any understanding? And then on the brand side, receiving these letters, does it mean your business is SOL? How do you bounce back from it? Because like you said, it's kind of ingrained in at least, SEO, that you now you're now the recipient of a warning letter. I'm just, trying to be wishful thinking, like if you get one, is it the end of the world, or how do you kind of come back from it? And I guess maybe final point to that too, I heard if you get on their radar, you're always on their radar. So is it true that the brands that get warning letters are more, I guess, like ready to be flagged?
Yes, indeed. So cut out there, but I'll keep going. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Per Okay, I'll keep rolling. There we go. Perfect. So well done, Shayda. I like this. So this question is really fun. So when we think about if a company gets a warning letter, or it's fun for me to talk about, but wouldn't be fun if a company got a warning letter. So if a company gets a warning letter, certainly they're more on the authorities' radar. Repeat warning letters can lead to injunction. So it's not the end of the world if a company gets a warning letter. They should hire legal counsel to help them respond. But I think, to your point, Shayda, a lot of companies do actually go out of business when they do get warning letters. They kind of potentially ride fast and loose, and then they get a warning letter, and then they just close down. That's not a very sustainable business strategy, but I think some companies probably play it that way. But if a company gets a warning letter, they can respond. They can work with the FDA, and in the case of some warning letters, for example, the recent one that I mentioned, the small herbalist farm, the warning letter Wednesday from today, this was actually a joint FDA and FTC warning letter. So part of this was actually cease and desist, which is has a lot more teeth than a warning letter, that basically bans the company from making unsubstantiated claims related to COVID in this context. If they do, they can be fined around $48,000 per occurrence and have to return funds to customers. It has a lot more reasons why you'd want to avoid a cease and desist. So warning letter is not the end of the world, but really the best strategy, of course, is to avoid them, right? Scan our marketing, make sure we don't have these high-risk words lurking anywhere. And in terms of the number of people, the headcount dedicated at a federal level, I'm not sure to cannabis or hemp cannabinoid regulation. I know that, the head of the Office of Dietary Supplements, Dr. Kara Welch, she's a really nice person. I like her. I see her at conferences quite often. She's really interested in continuing the dialogue with the cannabis industry to find a way to promote responsible commerce, right? Which really, in the eyes of the FDA, responsible commerce is manufacture your product correctly, label your product correctly, and don't make disease claims. Those are kind of the three foundations here. Now, when we look at states, a lot of these states, in particular on the hemp programs, they're very, very poorly staffed. For example, Alaska. When they started their hemp CBD registration program, the person that was running that was also the state agronomist. So full-time job, state agronomist. And what he told me was that the hemp program registration was a side hustle, trying to help out. In a lot of these states, it takes weeks to get back any response, just because they're so overwhelmed and so poorly staffed. West Virginia, Utah, these are states that probably just have one person, I think, in particular on their hemp product registration team.
That is so helpful to understand. Obviously, I didn't expect an explicit, there's three people or there's one person in any, federal or state regulatory body, but it is just, I think trying to give some scope and perspective to what we're dealing with. And I think to your point, it sounds like these regulators want to work with the industry. I think it's smart for them to work with the industry, not to look away from it. So kind of, want to pick your brain in terms of, I mean, we're talking about, we know the FDA hasn't come up with a final ruling on CBD as a dietary supplement, as safe for food and beverage. And I'm bringing this up because I was just in DC with the U.S. Hemp Roundtable on behalf of the Texas Hemp Coalition, which is a local advocacy group that I sit on the board with. And the big push was for regulating cannabinoids and specifically getting the senators and representatives to urge the FDA to make a decision. And I think the sentiment was a little bit neutral of like, we obviously want you to make a decision positively for our industry, but at the same time, we just want you to make a decision, and your lack of decision is what is creating even more chaos. And so I just look at it like, this industry is so big, it's not going anywhere, but these regulatory bodies don't really want to touch it. Like, I think it would be great if the FDA came out and said, yep, treat it like a dietary supplement, or no, it can't be in food and beverage. I think it would free up a lot of people's aspirations, as well as give obviously really clear cut, hey, now this is a dietary supplement. It needs to be treated as such. This is how we regulate dietary supplements. You need to have this on your label. You can't make these claims. And so it's like, I just find that we're in these conversations where they're like, we don't know enough about it. And I'm like, but it's in the market. You see these products. You can't avoid it. So wouldn't you want to regulate it instead of not talking about it? So I'm just curious from your perspective, from talking to some of these entities, these individuals, is it foolish of us to think that the FDA is going to move anytime soon? Or is that really what I believe is the inevitable? Like, they've got to, right? Or are they going to keep just kicking the can down the road?
I think that FDA is going to look to Congress, although I believe that it is within FDA's power to grant approval, for lack of a better description, of hemp-based cannabinoids. And what many of the listeners know is the complexity with hemp cannabinoid regulation is the preclusion, the drug preclusion rule, which is if it was investigated as a new drug, the drug companies essentially have dibs on it, because there's Epidiolex investigated, it's a CBD product investigated before. So they say, or so many people say, before CBD was marketed as an isolated ingredient, not in hemp extract form, but as an isolated ingredient, then again, the drug companies have dibs on it. So the complexity really is, well, does FDA want to kick the drug companies in the foot or in the back by saying, hey, I know that this is the rules, and they're clearly defined rules with the preclusion clauses, but we're going to make an exception this time. But keep investing in pharmaceutical drugs, and we're not going to impact that. So it's, I'm a natural health enthusiast, so you can guess what side of the fence I'm on. But it's important to, as we all know, it's important to see different perspectives and sides. So I don't think the FDA is going to do much anytime soon. So we look to Congress. We look to bills such as HR 841 that would help define a pathway for CBD or cannabinoids in dietary supplements. I think this is it's a great bill. Bills like this, I think, kind of continue to help move the conversation forward. You mentioned the roundtable. I'm a big fan of hempsupporter.com or .org. I can't recall, but I like the work the roundtable is doing, with things like the fly-in that you went to, and really helping to educate Congress, the people in Congress. Usually it's the legislative aides, then it bubbles up to the senators or the Congress people, about the importance of hemp cannabinoids. And I think one of the core parts of this is we have the American farmer. The American farmers, been invested in hemp growth and growing hemp cannabinoids for several years now, but we can't really benefit the American farmer that grows hemp cannabinoids until there's a legal pathway. So kind of educating Congress about how this is good for America. I know I'm speaking to the choir here, how this is good for America and really good for industry. I think that's kind of how we're going to continue to make change, and then change is going to happen at the congressional level, and then FDA is probably going to get on board. That's just my guess.
No, it's very in line with what I observed just doing that fly in. I have never been to DC and have done advocacy work here in Texas, but getting to go be on the ground, and yes, it was talking to a lot of aides and not directly talking to the politicians. And you realize how politics works, right? And so it was a lot of people even talking to the ag department, and they're like, oh, these bills, like the bill you mentioned, 841, they're like, oh, well, yeah, the FDA is probably not going to do anything. So why, like, we can't enforce the FDA to move. Like, we can't urge the FDA to move was kind of their attitude. And so you're kind of sitting there like, well, it'd be cool if somebody did something, you know? And so trying to get the buy-in from these different parties, these different sides of Congress, of just the process of politics in general, it was so eye-opening. And also it is very complex. And because then we're started talking about, you know, first they're like, isn't this ag? Now you guys want to talk about cannabinoids, and then cannabinoids isn't just CBD, CBG, CBN. Now you're getting into the THCs, and oh, doesn't that make you high? And well, what's the difference between Delta 8 and Delta 9? And just the snowball effect. I'm sitting in these meetings and it's just unraveling. And it's like, I know it's complex. I know it's not just a great, like, even if the FDA decided that they were going to regulate it, it's not that straightforward for them just to go flip a light switch and to implement regulation or to issue out regulation. It's very, very complex. I know that. And so just trying to obviously like put parameters up so that businesses and operators and also the consumers for who are buying these products, I think that's everybody's concern, consumer safety, of course. So the good actors, we want them to stay in business. The bad actors, we want to get, you know, ushered out because they're not compliant, they're not participating in the regulations, they're not, you know, upholding good labeling, manufacturing practices. And it's all because that end consumer is, you know, who's at the detriment when the product doesn't do what it says it's going to do. So it's like, I understand why we're in this predicament, but trying to get, you know, change made or trying to make sense of what the landscape is so difficult. So kind of with that said, obviously I think people need to find you on social media, check out your YouTube, subscribe to your Warning Letter Wednesday newsletters, just be a sponge to everything that you're creating, because I know you do it out of a labor of love, and it also is really to help the industry. But if there were, I don't know, I don't want to like, you know, say there's 5 takeaways or 3 takeaways, but like I love action. And so from our conversation, what are kind of like, you know, a couple of things that people listening or watching should like immediately go do? Is it go do a search on your, you know, website for, you know, these 3 words, or is it you need to go, you know, subscribe to this, that, or the other? I'm just curious what you think is the most important thing someone, after hearing all of this, probably having an oh shit moment, thinking, I probably said things I shouldn't say and I don't want a warning letter. What is that course of action that someone should go implement?
Yes. I'd say step 1 is to go through all old social media posts and make sure there's not any high risk words lurking. This includes infographics, hashtags, especially. And the FDA and FTC, they're going back several years on company social media posts. So think about a 5-year-old tweet, for example. So oftentimes when I'm reviewing companies' compliance, they may have a robust compliance program now, but what about what was happening a couple years ago? Maybe they've gone through change of ownership or different operations people, different social media managers, right? So step 1, go back and clean up old social media posts, scan for high-risk buzzwords. We talked about a lot of them today: COVID, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, depression. I review a lot of them on my Warning Letter Wednesdays. Send me an email. I'm more than happy to send you, the top 10 list or top 20 list or whatever it may be. Number 2 is on blogs. Educational blogs on a commercial website can be considered marketing, even if there's no direct linking, no call to action, no link to a shopping cart, anything like that. So just like social media posts, go back and look at those old blogs. They're probably lurking deep on your company's website and they're not doing any good, but they're considered marketing in the eyes of the authorities. So making sure that we don't have risky words on these blogs is super important. And then number 3 is following enforcement trends and acting accordingly. This is one of the reasons why I write Warning Letter Wednesday and and make all these YouTube videos, so we can kind of have that light bulb go off. Oh yeah, I didn't realize I was making this claim that can get me in trouble. Let me adjust my marketing now before I get a warning letter or something worse.
All such good words of advice. I look forward to continuing to learn from you. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast. I hope everybody just rushes over to your page, your content, which will be linked below in the show notes for people who are tuning in. And thanks for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it, Asa.
Time flies when you're having fun, Shayda. This was a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed talking about these important topics. So, together we can kind of rise the tide. The more that we can share the word about compliance and effective marketing strategies and enforcement trends, the better our industry will be as a whole. So thank you again.